most of the travel writers, they didn't look like me, they didn't sound like me. It was something that I thought, okay, maybe this is nice, but it's not for me. But to come across Evliya Çelebi, Ibn Battuta, Ibn Jubair, these famous Muslim travelers, that really inspired me because it made me realize, hold on, Muslims can also do this. When I was learning about Jewish history of Europe, it was tragic, horrific. But then I learned my European Muslim Jewish history. It's beautiful. Whether you go to Al-Andalus or you come to the Balkans, the Jews of Europe were protected. In this area, it was the Muslims that lost. And the losers do not write the popular history. The winners write the popular history. In Albania, I was shocked. Towns like Berat and Gjirokasta, these looked like something straight out of Evliya Çelebi's book. It was like looking at a dream. So to answer the question, did I see the traces of Ottoman footprints? It was everywhere. There is no Eastern Europe without the Ottoman heritage. We have to normalize the idea that there is no Europe without Muslims.
Ketebe'nin katkılarıyla hazırlanan Düşünce Atlası başlıyor.
Tharik, would you talk about yourself?
Of course, yeah. So I'm an author and also a travel writer, and I tend to specialize on Muslim heritage, especially in the Western Hemisphere. But to be honest, wherever I go in the world, I like to seek out the Islamic heritage, especially in the places where it's overlooked, maybe ignored, maybe marginalized. So it's to try and tell those stories from that perspective. But from a personal level, I'm of Bangladeshi origin. I was born in the northeast of Bangladesh in a small town, in a small area region known as Sylhet. And I came here when I was 3 years old, but I've spent most of my life here in England. I think if we want to answer that question, I think one of the answers is in the book. I think the last famous Muslim travel writer died about 400 years ago, Evliya Çelebi, you know. So we don't have any travel writers from the Muslim heritage background. And I think it's important when we think of the impact of travel writing. It's actually a popular way in which we represent people, cultures, and places. And this is the one that has the lasting impression on most people. You know, we can talk about academics, we can talk about big history books, but travel writing is one of the most popular ways in which people get a perception of a place. And I think if that perception of a place is always written from the very same narrow demographic in the English language, this is usually a white middle-class male, then we end up with a very, very skewed perception of the world. Did I have any dreams of travels? I have always dreamt of travel. You know, the reality is I'm an immigrant. You know, I'm an immigrant. I'm the son of an immigrant. Travel is in our blood. This is what we did, whether we liked it or not. We had to travel. But I really became passionate about travel when I started to meet people from all over the world. You know, from a very early age, I was obsessed with books, atlases, you know, books about different places, foreign places. I loved watching all of the documentaries about far off places. And I wanted to know where these places are. I wanted to feel them for myself, experience them for myself. And of course, reading people like Evliya Çelebi, Ibn Battuta, Ibn Jubair, these famous Muslim travelers, that really inspired me because it made me realize, hold on, Muslims can also do this. Because before this, you know, reading in the English language, most of the travel writers, they didn't look like me, they didn't sound like me. It was something that I thought, okay, maybe this is nice, but it's not for me. But to come across Evliya Çelebi, to come across Ibn Battuta, to come across these people, as you can see, I'm naming people who have been dead for a very long time. It was very, very empowering. And Evliya Çelebi in particular, because of the region that I wanted to travel in for this book. Yes, I can remember my first travel because it was always to go back to Bangladesh. This was always, you know, this is the reality of being an immigrant child. You know, for our parents, travel was about necessity. Travel was not a luxury. We didn't go on holidays. We went back home. So most of my earliest memories of traveling, getting on a plane, you know, you got dressed up very, very smart. You got onto the plane because when you landed, your family there, they needed to see you were the rich, wealthy, you know, foreign cousins that came over. It was never really the kind of travel I do now. But of course, in those journeys as well, there were romantic memories. I created many, many memories of my childhood birthplace. I created many memories of seeing my my grandparents, seeing my uncles and families. And even when I was in Bangladesh, I loved to go out and explore and see what it was about this country that, you know, I didn't already know. So I've traveled around Bangladesh a lot, but when I was a child, we would always just go home. You know, you would go back to the village and you would spend time with family. Really, the first time I really began to get the bug for travel was I went to a football tournament. When I was young, I used to play a lot of football. I was very, very keen. You know, I assumed one day I'd be playing professionally, but clearly God had other plans. But I was very, very keen. And our football team, they would go to Scandinavia to play in these huge, like, youth World Cups, they were called. And one of them was in Denmark called the Dana Cup. This is the first one I went to. And the reason why it was such a powerful moment, instead of traveling the world had come to me. Because suddenly I was talking to people from Sao Paulo in Brazil, from young boys in Tanzania, from Bengalis in Calcutta. I'm Bengali, but they were nothing like me. They were so different. And this, you know, having these conversations with them, of course, I loved the football, but this was an added bonus that I had never imagined. And I wanted to know, what is this Sao Paulo like? What is Tanzania like? What is the Calcutta of these Bengalis like? And this is the first time I think I really began to get a passion for actually going out and exploring the world. Yeah, I do both. You know, I love both. And clearly the reading is what inspires a lot of the travel. But of course, I'm not just always traveling because I want to see something different and exciting. I read a lot of books to inform my travel, so I can learn about a place, so I can write about it, so I can give a perspective on these places. And I will often refer to history books in order to create that perception of a place. Yeah, I mean, I've read many modern travel writers like William Dalrymple, who now writes a lot of history, Bill Bryson, who's the guy who writes funny things, you know, Patrick Leigh Fermat, who wrote quite a bit about the Balkans, where I traveled to as well, Eric Newby. I read a lot of these people, but you will notice that I am naming mainly white men, and this was the problem. You know, the more I read, the more I realized that I am beginning to see it only from a particular perspective, because as part of my studies, I also read people like Edward Said, you know, Bell Hook, Stuart Hall. And these theories awakened me to what was happening. You know, when something is the only way in which you see the world, it becomes normalized and you believe there is no other way unless somebody is able to show you the other side. And so from a very early age, of course, for me, it was normal to perceive the world through those lenses, the lens of the historic white English male writers. And so having read people like Said, Hall and Bell Hooks and people like that, to be awakened to the idea that actually this is a very skewed perspective of the world, I began to see a completely different world. I think it's one of the reasons why my book, Minarets in the Mountains, has done so well, because suddenly people in the English language world were seeing the Muslim parts of Europe through Muslim eyes. Someone who saw this heritage as mine. It's my heritage as a Muslim. It's my people. You know, this is my culture. These are my heroes. These are my buildings. These are my monuments. And when you are writing from the perspective where this culture is not the other, it's very, very different. It's a completely different perspective. And this is what has appealed to a lot of the people who have read the book, and they have called it what we say, it's becoming increasingly popular in the English language, to decolonize it. And what that means is, up until now, the travel writing field has been colonized by a very small, narrow demographic. This is not necessarily about colonialism. Of course, colonialism has played its part in this as well. But when we talk about decolonizing travel writing, we are saying we need to make space for other voices so that the other people can show you how they see the world. And as this book has proven, when you have other people looking at the world, they see a very different world. Of course, we all see it differently. Yeah, I'm telling it from the perspective of a European Muslim. I consider myself many things. I don't believe I have to choose. I'm a Bangladeshi, I'm British, I'm European, I'm Muslim. I'm happy with all of these. I don't have to be one or the other. And for me, when I'm traveling in these places, okay, I'm not originally from Europe as a person, but I am European, and this is my heritage. This is my culture. I see the Bosnian, I see the Turk in these places. I see the Albanians as my brothers and sisters, as Europeans, as European Muslims. So when I'm looking at this culture, I'm not talking about it being foreign. I'm not not talking about it being the result of invasion. I'm not talking about it as being alien. I am not, in the words of Edward Said, considering it to be the other. And this is what has happened historically in the English language, which is why when I speak about indigenous European Muslims, people ask me, what is this? What are you talking about? Or when I say to them, there are European Muslim countries. If we look at the demographic of Bosnia, Albania and Kosovo, all of them are Muslim majority. They're Muslim countries. Okay. We can talk about constitution separately, but in terms of demographic, this is what they are. And yet when I say these to people, they are confused. But Muslims have been European longer than white people have been American. Yet we don't question that. So this is one of the reasons why I needed to write this book. I could have written it as a PhD. Okay, I could have written the main thesis maybe as a PhD. I could have written it as a piece of research, and some people have. But I realized that we needed to write it in a popular format, in a way that is accessible, because a lot of what I've written, the academics know this, the scholars know this, but it's not. These are not the people that we are trying to make them see this. We have to make the layperson see this. We have to normalize the idea that there is no Europe without Muslims, because this is a problematic position for a lot of people, and I don't understand why. Well, of course. I know this. You only have to look at, when I say the word Albania, you put it into Google, you say Albanians, and you will see all the negative things that come. And in my book, I have spoken about the way in which this has developed. It's because historically, even the people who wrote about Albania in a positive way, somebody like Edith Durham, for example, who is considered the queen of Albania, when you look at her writing today, she is also reinforcing, sadly, she is also reinforcing some of the negative stereotypes of the idea that, for example, Albanians are somehow barbaric. Albanians are somehow not as evolved as the rest of Europe. When you read this literature back, when you look at it now with modern eyes, you begin to see within the nuance how these stereotypes were still being reinforced. This is not to say that somebody like Edith Durham didn't do an amazing job for Albanians. In that time, she was writing, she put Albania on the map, she wrote about Albanian culture in a way nobody had. So credit to her for that. But now when we look back, we have to remember that writers of that generation were also writing at a time when white Westerners colonized much of the world and believed they were superior to the rest of the world. Eugenics was a normalized part of European thinking, where there was a genuine bona fide belief that certain human beings were more evolved than others. And in this case, of course, somebody like Edith Durham, who was part of that class of people, would have considered herself to have been evolved more than, say, the average Albanian. As sympathetic a position as she took, this was just her natural disposition of that time. And this is what we dangerously sometimes overlook when we use this literature today. I'm not an expert on Ottomans, but what I will say is I was following in the footsteps of Evliya Çelebi, and of course, using Evliya Çelebi's eyes through his Seyahatname, it was easy for me to see what was left. For example, when you go to the middle of Sarajevo and you see the Gazi Husrev Bey Masjid and the whole complex, everywhere I went, I found these spectacular monuments. But I was also able to see what had been demolished. But what I found absolutely mind-blowing for me was the extent of how much of that original Muslim heritage was still there, in places that I least expected it. And I want to come back to Albania for this, because it's the country that really, it completely shocked me how much. I knew about Bosnia a little bit. I knew that there would be lots of Muslim heritage there because the people, they really embrace their Muslim identity. In Albania, I was shocked. You know, when I went out to the mountains and I came to cities and towns like Berat and Gjirokasta, these looked like something straight out of Evliya Çelebi's book. Yeah. You have these Ottoman era spectacular merchant houses cascading down the hillside. It was like looking at a dream, you know, and this was beautiful. But also it was very sad for me. It was sad because the true story of these places are not known very well. And Evliya Çelebi helped me understand some of this. He helped me understand the importance of Berat and the importance of Gjirokasta in historicity. For example, when he visited these places, they had many, many madrasa, they had many teki, they had many, many masajid, and they had students from all over coming to study in these places. I would never have thought of Albania as being a place of Islamic scholarship. This was completely new for me. So to answer the question, did I see the traces of Ottoman footprints? It was everywhere. There is no, Western Balkans. There is no Eastern Europe, whatever you wish to call it, without the Ottoman heritage. It was Ottoman longer than it's not been Ottoman. And even though there were very, very aggressive efforts by the nation builders of these post-Ottoman era, there was aggressive effort to eradicate, to destroy, dismantle, and rewrite the history. It's impossible. It's impossible to eradicate nearly 6 centuries of history. The people remember, the people know their stories, the people know their identity is connected to this, even if some of them are very uncomfortable with this. And, I did not travel around and find people who are just like, oh yeah, we have this great Muslim history. Some of the people were very, very uncomfortable with this because they also believe these were invaders, these were foreigners, these were alien people who should not have been there. And this is the popular narrative, okay? The reality is, in Europe, historically, you had this battle between Christendom and Islam. And of course, the Jews were in the middle, getting, treated very badly, mainly by the Christians, because this is the other positive story that we completely deny. We do not talk about. When I was learning about European history and the Jewish history of Europe, it was tragic, horrific. But then I learned my European Muslim Jewish history. It's beautiful. Whether you go to Al-Andalus, whether you go to Sicily, or you come to the Balkans, the Jews of Europe were protected. They were given their rights. Of course, under this dhimmi system, but compared to what was happening elsewhere, it was fantastic. So I didn't just see Ottoman heritage. I also found Ottoman heritage in the stories. Going to the Sephardic Jewish synagogue and asking, why is there a Spanish synagogue here? How did it get here? It's because Bayezid helped the people come here. And these are the stories that have also been forgotten. And the reason, of course, as I was alluding to, is because in this area, it was the Muslims that lost. Okay? And the losers do not write the popular history. The winners write the popular history. But we live in an age where people want to know all of the history. And this is why people have been so receptive to this. Even if they are not Muslim, they have said, this is also my history. And I want to know it. I have these amazing messages coming from people who are saying it's made me consider my prejudices towards Muslims in Europe, and it's made me wonder what is my real European history. This is all I wanted to do. I wanted to use this book to make people think, but also to say, go and see for yourself. Go and see for yourself. If you pick up this book and not the traditional guidebook, maybe you will see a completely different Europe to the one that you're used to. I've been to Turkey 4 times, but I haven't traveled extensively in Turkey yet, I will confess. My favorite place is Istanbul, without a shadow of a doubt, but that's because of the history and it's very cosmopolitan, and I've only traveled a little bit to other parts, the typical holiday spaces, and some through the country. I went to Izmir, but I haven't traveled extensively in Turkey yet.
Okay. Yeah. Any plan in future?
Well, I don't know. If I get an invitation from you guys, maybe I will.
Okay.
No, but
say you're invited.
Yes, I absolutely have to.
Because you have to go through Turkey anyway, if
Absolutely.
you are following the footsteps of...
Exactly. If I continue to follow in his footsteps, then I will have to go there. And I hope I can one day continue to follow in his footsteps, because I only saw a glimpse of Evliya Çelebi's work. And of course, I had to access it in English. So this is the other difficulty, because a lot of his writing is still in the original and has not been translated into English. It's so much.
Have you been in Konya?
No, I haven't been to Konya yet. No. I need to go to Konya because where I'm from originally, in Sylhet, the saint Shah Jalal, he is reportedly from Konya originally. Yeah. Although some people debate this. Some say he's from Yemen. Some say he's from Konya. I like to think he's from Konya. And I would say make sure you have a lot of money because unfortunately it's not an area that pays a lot. But what I will say is, I'm not one of those travel writers who's a bit of a snob. I think we have a lot of Muslims who are going into travel influence, shall we say. So this may be like YouTube videos, this may be on Instagram, TikTok, and through maybe blogging and other short form. And I think this is also powerful because this is also very, very influential. And what I would say to them is, don't fall into the trap of showing the world the way you have already been shown to show it. In other words, up until now, we are often in the English-speaking world, we are seeing the world through the lens of the historic travel writers and the historic people who made the documentaries, who made the travel shows. Try to show it from your lens, you know, focus on what is important to us, maybe as Muslims, as Turks, as whatever. You know, think about what is special to us and don't be afraid to show that on the screen. In terms of travel writing, it's very difficult because honestly, writing pays very poorly and it's very, very difficult to break into this. And also the travel writing genre, unfortunately, is still dominated by the same demographic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Ketebe'nin katkılarıyla hazırlanan Düşünce Atlası sona erdi.